Anyway, thank you all for joining us today. And I guess I'll just carry on. If you need to take a break, please do so and come back. Anyway, the title of my talk this morning is The Anatomy of a Pandemic. And I do have a slideshow. So let me, I go to what, share screen here?
That's right.
Okay, and then here's my, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, let me put it onto a little larger view. Okay, so that should be a full screen.
Good.
Can you see that?
Yes.
It's coming up, all right? All right. All right, and so good morning again, everyone. I'm Alex Jack, and I'll be speaking to you this morning from the beautiful Berkshire Mountains in Western Massachusetts. And I'm delighted to participate in this wonderful forum and salute Ganada and Sheldon for organizing this event. I'll be talking about the coronavirus pandemic and trying to put it into a unique macrobiotic perspective. There will be one more new viral epidemic before the spiral of history peaks in about 20 years, Michio Kushi predicted in late 2014, and it will spread worldwide. I was executive director of the Kushi Institute at that time, and along with my associate, Edward Esco, we had gone into Boston to see Michio about guidelines for the Ebola crisis that had just broken out and was threatening to spread beyond West Africa. Michio offered sound dietary advice based on his seminar on AIDS and diet that he had given in the Republic of the Congo for the World Health Organization, based on his, for the World Health Organization, based on his work with AIDS people in New York City. But he warned that Ebola would not be the last major viral epidemic. He said to us, world leaders will come to you. And I think by that, he meant that a balanced yin-yang dietary and lifestyle approach offered the most effective remedy to Ebola and other viral epidemics, and that ultimately society would turn to us for advice and guidance. It may have been Michio's last prediction, as he passed away a few months later. Yeah, in the wake of that meeting with Michio, we did actually set up a dedicated website called Ebola and Diet, which is still up, devoted to dietary and lifestyle guidelines. And we got a lot of positive response, including from one of the heads of a tropical disease department for infectious diseases, who was very supportive. And also, I think it was Delta Airlines, which was the major airline carrier to West Africa, congratulated us because their passengers and their crew were terrified of going back and forth out of West Africa at that time. And so our guidelines helped to reassure them that at least there was some dietary protection. Okay, this past spring, as the coronavirus emerged, I was invited to teach at the Kushi Institute in Europe for several weeks. In addition to classes on healthcare, diagnosis, and 9-star key, I gave a public lecture on the corona crisis, focusing on the probable origin of the virus as a result of unsustainable agricultural practices. But as Amsterdam gradually shut down, my talk had to be moved online. After the United States government warned Americans abroad to come home immediately or face being stranded, I rescheduled my remaining classes and moved up my return flight home. The day I left in late March for Boston, the KI classrooms and restaurants were closed down. Natural foods and takeout meals were still allowed to be sold at Deishima, the school's well-stocked natural food store, conveniently located across from the Rijksmuseum. I love to visit the National Museum and practice my visual diagnosis skills on the Rembrandts, Vermeers, and other masterpieces. But like the nearby Van Gogh Museum, it was one of the first casualties of the epidemic. It barred its doors to visitors before the schools and churches closed, a telling commentary on what the Dutch hold sacred. The Kuan Yin Temple, one of the most peaceful places in Amsterdam, closed down even before I arrived. It seems the Bodhisattva of compassion had a heavy schedule in the days and months ahead. The coronavirus pandemic gave rise to a multitude of conspiracy theories. The most persistent, and the one promoted by the White House and United States State Department, is that the virus originated in a Chinese laboratory. It turned out that many of the original victims of the outbreak had not visited the wet market in Wuhan or come into contact with anyone who did. 2 labs in Wuhan were engaged in research on bat viruses associated with SARS, a deadly corona-like disease that had broken out in China in 2003. One of the Chinese labs was engaged in bio-war research, and there was collaboration with American researchers. Investigative journalists turned up troubling evidence of what was called gain-of-function experiments, involving the manipulation of deadly viruses by both superpowers. Because of an international agreement banning biowar research, the tests were classified as, quote, biodefensive, unquote, or designed to counter new enemy bioweapons rather than manufacture new biooffensive ones. This linguistic sleight of hand not only flouted the treaty, but it also made pathogens more deadly, transmissible, and in some cases, newly airborne. Still, as most outside experts and global health authorities agreed, there is no evidence that the virus emerged from the labs. The Trump administration's determination to demonize China harkened back to the search for weapons for mass destruction that served as a pretext for the war in Iraq. As soon as COVID-19 surfaced, I intuitively felt that it arose from monoculture and other modern agricultural practices, so that it was irrelevant whether it first surfaced in the wet market or in the laboratory. Ebola, another mysterious viral disease that emerged in Africa, was also carried by bats. In that case, the bats ate fruit, and the virus was traced to tainted bananas. In the wake of colonialism and industrialization, monoculture and commodity crops have spread worldwide. And in nearby Uganda, site of Marburg, another Ebola-like viral disease, banana consumption is the highest in the world. In South America, Argentine hemorrhagic fever, a viral disease very similar to Ebola, emerged in recent years. Medical researchers traced it to pesticides that upset the delicate ecosystem of natural checks and balances in the corn or maize fields. The end result was the emergence of a novel virus transmitted by a small rodent dubbed the maize mouse. In Malaysia, Nipah viral disease broke out about 20 years ago, following the rapid clear-cutting of the forest to make way for palm oil plantations. The deforestation drove fruit bats to trees on the edge of a hog farm. The pigs got infected from the bat droppings and urine, and that's how the epidemic started, and it was the basis for the film Contagion. Similar new viral conditions have emerged in many countries ravaged by modern agriculture, deforestation, and urbanization. But for the most part, these outbreaks have remained localized and little known internationally. In China, the virus emerged in Wuhan, a large industrial city of about 10 million people on the Yangtze River in central China. It was originally thought that the tainted meat in the market started the outbreak, but as I mentioned, many, if not most, of the original patients had no contact with the market. The pangolin, lower left, is a little scaly anteater and was originally believed to be the main carrier of the coronavirus, but bats quickly moved to the top of the suspect list. Known as horseshoe bats, this particular strain of bats came from Yunnan, a province 2,000 kilometers southwest of Wuhan. I'll go back to the previous slide and you can see Yunnan. It's colored in a kind of beige or light brown, kind of in the middle, lower southwest of Wuhan. It's actually 2,000 kilometers. It's 1,500 miles away, but that's where the virus appeared to originate. Okay, horseshoe bats in Yunnan, top right picture, and other parts of China are insect eaters, unlike the fruit bats on the left-hand side in Africa that are linked to Ebola. Insect-eating bats are carnivorous and more yang, while the fruit-eating bats are more ean. Corona emerged in a temperate zone where the plants, animals, and people are also more yang, small, compact, and drier. Ebola emerged in a tropical climate where the flora and fauna are more ean, large, expanded, and moist. Corona thrives in cooler weather, Ebola in warmer weather. Corona creates blood clots as one of its main symptoms, which are very hard and yang by classification, whereas Ebola leads to hemorrhaging, expanded ean symptoms. So they're complementary opposite viruses. In the case of Ebola, the most likely scenario was that chemicals sprayed on the soil created havoc in the microbiota, the bacteria, the viruses, the fungus in the soil, leading to a mutation and giving rise to the Ebola virus. The virus contaminated bananas and other fruit. The fruit bats ate the bananas and incubated the virus in their digestive systems. The bats are not carriers and they do not get sick. But as small, compact, warm-blooded mammals with high metabolism from flying, they augment or pressure cook the virus as it passes through them. Then their saliva, urine, and feces fall to the earth and infected chimpanzees, gorillas, and other monkeys. The monkeys are a valuable food source known as bushmeat in the war-torn, conflict, mineral, devastated Central Africa. By the time the people who ate monkey meat got the virus, it had increased in virulence by passing through two mammals. Relatives or medical personnel who then came into contact with their bodily fluids often got infected too, and the contagion spread like wildfire because it had now passed through three mammals, each one magnifying the effects. A compounding factor may be that the bat's nocturnal night lifestyle. After hunting at night, they sleep during the day in caves, and their body temperature drops precipitously as they enter a state of temporary hibernation. This rapid, constant temperature fluctuation reminded me of the transmutation experiments that Edward Esco, Woody Johnson, and myself had done over the years with Quantum Rabbit, a small green energy company that we started. When we rapidly charged the vacuum tube with additional bursts of electric current, the results were much greater than when we left it at a constant arc. Michio had encouraged us to investigate the rapid heating and cooling of different elements in our quest to create industrial elements from common ordinary materials like beach sand or silicon. Michio had encouraged, so the bat's internal thermostat appears to have turbocharged the virus. Note too the lack of social distancing among the bats, so that their close quarters may also have contributed to the virulence of the virus. In the case of corona, chemicals sprayed on crops in Yunnan, that southwestern province, which is a major hub for rice, soy, rapeseed, cotton, and tea, may have given rise to a novel viral strain. In addition to fertilizer, chemical pesticides are used on the crops to prevent insect infestation. In 2019, the year when, toward the end of the year when corona emerged, Yunnan was devastated with an invasion of army worm, known locally as the heart-devouring worm, and pesticide use soared. Since insects and spiders are the main food of horseshoe bats, they are at very high risk of contamination and probably picked up the toxin from eating these tiny creatures exposed to the sprays, or they may have nibbled on the contaminated crops themselves. This also explains why pangolins are carriers. What do the horseshoe bats and the pangolins have in common? They are both insect eaters. The pangolins are small anteaters that eat ants, termites, and other ground insects. They are also directly or indirectly affected by insecticides and other sprays. Journalist Abraham Lustgarten reported from his visit to Yunnan. He said, Yunnan is undergoing enormous change. Quaint subsistent farm plots were overtaken by hastily erected apartment towers and high-speed rail lines as the province endured dizzying development fueled by decades of Chinese economic expansion. With every felled tree, the bats' habitat shrank, putting the viruses they carried on a collision course with humanity. Overall, pesticide use in China has skyrocketed from less than 1 million metric tons in 2004 and 3.7 million tons in 2014. Pesticide use per hectare is about 1.5 to 4 times the world average. Glyphosate is widely used on corn, rice, soy, and other crops throughout China. The herbicide has been linked to cancer, and in the United States is the subject of class action lawsuits against Monsanto. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, researchers just published a study a few days ago in Nature, suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted via bats to the human digestive as well as respiratory system. As with fruit-eating bats in Africa, Chinese insect-eating bats are carriers and do not symptomatize, but they are trapped and eaten in China, hence the wet markets. And they are also subjects of medical and military research, hence the labs. Bat droppings may have also been, as I mentioned, picked up by the pangolin and other mammals, further concentrating the virus. But for the most part, COVID-19 appears to have passed through only one or at most 2 mammals rather than 3 as in Africa. Compared to the ordinary flu, corona is about 10 times more deadly, but compared to Ebola, it is 10 times weaker. This is a logarithmic progression proportional to the number of mammals it has passed through. In a just published article on bats and the coronavirus, Scientific American concluded, quote, the emergence of new pathogens tends to happen in places where a dense population has been changing the landscape by building roads and mines, cutting down forests, and intensifying agriculture, unquote. Okay, a related theory is that respiratory susceptibility to coronavirus originated with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, Monsanto's weed killer. According to Stephanie Seneff, PhD, a scientific researcher at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, biofuels made from corn, wheat, and other crops sprayed with Roundup are now used so widely by the transportation sector that aerolized glyphosate from exhaust fumes are everywhere. Not only cars, trucks, and buses, but also planes and ships now use a mixture of conventional fuels and biodiesel containing glyphosate. Recall how coronavirus initially spread among passengers on airplanes and cruise ships exposed to these emissions. In China, she points out, the Yangtze River runs through Wuhan and is highly polluted with industrial waste, as well as pesticide runoff containing glyphosate. Other hotspots for COVID-19 included New York and New Orleans, that both border polluted rivers, the Hudson and the Mississippi, and have large biodiesel fleets of buses and rapid transport systems. Much of Europe's biodiesel originates from GMO Roundup-ready soybeans grown in Argentina. E-cigarettes, she points out, also include aerosolized biodiesel additives, including glyphosate, and the recent epidemic of a new vaping disease, particularly among young people, that affects their respiratory system, presents many of the same symptoms as corona. She concludes, I strongly suspect that the degree to which a person is susceptible to COVID-19 is proportional to the degree to which they have been exposed to glyphosate. Eating a certified organic diet and staying away from major highways may be among the best tools for protection from an acute reaction to COVID-19. Another popular theory of COVID-19's origin is that it is linked to the rollout of 5G wireless networks in Wuhan, Seattle, and other initial hubs of contagion. A little research shows that 5G did appear shortly before the pandemic, but it was also introduced in dozens of other Chinese cities at the same time beside Wuhan, and no outbreaks occurred. Still, 5G, as well as 4G, 3G, 2G, and other earlier incarnations, may be a significant contributing factor. In his new book, The Invisible Rainbow, the first comprehensive investigation of the health effects of electricity, from the introduction of the telegraph to today's smartphones, computers, and satellites, medical researcher Albert Furstenberg makes a compelling case that the influenza epidemic of 1917 and 18 was linked to the introduction of radar during World War I that lowered natural immunity. Medical sleuths have long puzzled why the misnamed Spanish flu first appeared among US soldiers in Kansas and among French and German soldiers on the Western Front, among whom 1/2 to 3/4 were among the first to get the influenza. Furstenberg, who first awakened to holistic health through Sugar Blues, the Macrobiotic classic by Bill Dufty, observes a plant-based vegan diet himself, but he contends that background electricity has had a bigger impact on the rise of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and other chronic ills than poor diet. His medical charts correlating the rise of these disorders with the introduction of radio, television, TV, computers, and other common electrical appliances are eye-opening. However, I feel electric cooking, which the macrobiotic community has long recognized as an existential threat to health, may be the underlying factor in this rise, but its impact is not discussed in his book. In a recent article, Is the Sky Falling? Furstenberg links susceptibility to COVID with EMFs and indirectly with 5G. Yes, he concluded there is a respiratory virus associated with influenza. No, the virus does not cause the disease. Influenza is a neurological disease that can affect almost every organ with or without respiratory symptoms. It is caused by electricity, unquote. A further tie-in with bats is that satellites, cell phones, and other electronics affect their ability to navigate and to hunt through echolocation. Climate change is a further contributing factor. It has shifted the bat's geographical range and hibernation cycle. Warmer temperatures can also affect and alter the frequency and pitch of their ability to echolocate. Okay, so who gets corona? Equally important, beside the origin and cause of the pandemic, is the question who gets it and who doesn't. Our view of the data shows that people in northern advanced industrial societies are at much higher risk. Besides pollution, higher living standards, and greater educational opportunities, what do the countries where the disease is raging have in common? You can see from this chart that Belgium actually tops the list, followed by Spain, Britain, Italy, France. I think for some reason, Brazil was not on this list, but I think it's moved up, even though this chart was made, within a week ago. According to the World Health Organization, CDC, and other international health bodies, about 88% of all those who die from COVID have heart disease, cancer, diabetes, or other pre-existing condition. Their natural immune function is already suppressed, and they are highly susceptible to viral infection. Healthy adults and children, most of whom have not lived long enough to develop chronic diseases, remain largely immune. So this chart shows obesity levels, which are a main precondition for those chronic diseases. And again, you can see there's a strong correlation with the countries that have the high COVID rates: United States, Canada, Britain, Spain. Again, there's Belgium right up, bunched up at the top. And at the very bottom, Japan, India, Vietnam, South Korea. Interestingly, China is way down. Even though the epidemic started in China, it's actually affected a very tiny number of people. Okay, so, and what is the main factor in these pre-existing conditions? Well, of course, from the macrobiotic view and the view of actually most medical doctors today, it's the modern diet high in fat, animal, protein, sugar, and ultra-processed foods. And this chart pretty much tells that story. The main determinant in this chart is meat and other animal food. Interestingly, Luxembourg is at the very top, and I think actually that probably includes Belgium, because they're usually put together, in statistical models. And so that makes sense why Belgium actually tops the list, followed by the United States. Interestingly, Australia and New Zealand have high animal food consumption, but they took very early preventive measures, including major social distancing. So they were able to prevent the further spread. But again, you see Spain very high up on the list. And then it doesn't, this chart stopped at Italy. But as you go down, I've seen many charts, we get to the areas around the world where the virus has very few, it's affected very few people, and they have very low animal food consumption rates, like throughout most of Southeast Asia and other parts of Africa and South America. So meat, poultry, eggs, dairy food, and other animal products are classified, as we know, as more yang, and they worsen COVID-19. Hence its faster spread in these temperate northern countries. In contrast, sugar, excessive fruit, too much oil, coffee, alcohol, and other strong substances worsen Ebola, hence its emergence in tropical southern regions. So again, we can see how their complementary opposite foods affect these two different types of viruses in different ways. So the modern diet, just as in modern agriculture, along with deforestation, urbanization, digitalization, are the underlying origin and cause of the crisis. Modern way of eating is the main factor in determining who will get sick and who will not. A plant-based whole foods diet naturally protects against disease, both chronic and infectious. So again, I think strengthening natural immunity is the main solution to this crisis and preventing other ones. Just a further word about the human virome. Modern society's war against nature is another way of looking at the ultimate cause of this crisis. And just as farmers are misled into destroying weeds, insects, and other important parts of the natural ecosystem, at least until recently, physicians and other healthcare givers believe that bacteria and viruses, for the most part, must be exterminated. In fighting microbes, we are fighting ourselves. Each of us has trillions of bacteria and viruses living symbiotically in our bodies. On average, this comes to about 4 to 6 pounds per person, and they make up a major part of our DNA. This is a war that cannot be won and one that should never be fought. Out of ignorance and anger, many farmers and communities in China and Europe and around the world have launched campaigns to eradicate bats because of their link to epidemic diseases. But as environmentalists note, this approach is misguided. Bats are one of the world's main pollinators. They disperse seeds and they eat mosquitoes and other insects, preventing outbreaks of malaria and other deadly scourges. The new viral epidemics are largely caused by our war on nature and our mounting arsenal of deadly chemicals, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, and other poisons, not from random chance mutations. The novel viruses are Mother Nature's way of fighting back, the original biodefense. Okay, so to conclude and to summarize, this graphic shows Yunnan province, the beautiful agricultural area where the bats live and where the virus first appeared. And then below I have 5 slides, which I've selected to illustrate the origin and cause and spread of coronavirus using the 5 transformations. So those of you who know this basic model, starting at the left, you see the farmer spraying the field. So that represents tree energy. So it's outward spraying of the fields, kill the insects and the weeds. Then you go up to the back, which represents fire energy, very active, dynamic little mammal flying around, which has picked up the virus from the insects or from leaves or whatever. And then in the middle, representing soil energy in the center of the key flow, is fast food. When people eat modern diet high in ultra processed foods, now they become susceptible to viruses, so they can easily pick it up from people who are carrying the virus or from animals. And then in the middle phase, the fourth little picture, the people end up symptomatizing, and the organs associated with metal energy, of course, are the lungs and large intestine. And so this is a respiratory virus, so that accords very well with this little model. And for the most part, the technology they're receiving, is in a very confined metallic environment with all kinds of injections and vaccines and in the process being made. And so anyway, it's a very condensed type of energy. And then unfortunately, many don't make it. So slide number 4 represents the water energy as they dissolve into the next world. So many people have lost. So it's a very tragic cycle, but it follows very clearly the 5 transformations. Okay, so in these challenging times, to conclude, I would say it is important to stay balanced and centered. The fear and anxiety generated by the crisis is actually worse than the virus itself. Parents, teachers, workers, children have come up with many original and creative responses to the crisis and everyday life. And this font of resilience and community solidarity augurs well for the future. I like to think that this crisis is a dress rehearsal for a more unified planetary action to reduce global warming and climate change. Unfortunately, on the minus side, virtually no government, hospital, or parent-teachers association has issued basic common sense guidelines to strengthen natural immunity through diet and lifestyle. To prevent the next pandemic, organic, plant-based, dietary, agricultural, environmental changes will need to be implemented. The creative energy released by Corona could lead further on this path to planetary health and sustainability, but only if we self-reflect and make nature our friend and not our enemy. Okay, so thank you for listening to my presentation. This is some of my contact information. That's my email address. Also, some of our websites with further information on Corona, as well as, of course, we had to move our Macrobiotic Summer Conference online, and that will be held this August from the 12th to the 16th. We invite you to participate. Some of the same speakers for your forum will be attending, but there'll be many others from around the world. And so we would love to see you for that event. And anyway, we've got all kind of other important information on these websites. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or entertain any comments. So let me see if I can get out of the slideshow here.
Well, Alex, you are a true researcher. We really appreciate all the thought that you put into this. It's so interesting. Thank you so much.